morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone from wherever you might be joining us for today's webinar on reconnecting the dots, unifying QA tech and teams. I am excited to welcome Sergio and Keith, and also my guest. My name is Heather Versillo, and I'm a product marketing manager here at TestRail, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. But Sergio oversees the solution architecture department here at TestRail, and he guides teams globally in sectors like automotive, health, and telco to craft high quality testable products. And while he advocates for agile methods and hands-on learning daily at work, Sergio does balance this and his professional pursuits with personal interests in running and eating, which he feels embodies his belief in the harmony of speed and quality. And then Keith is the director of QA services at Rivers Agile, a software consulting company with a strong foundation in QA professional services. With 2 decades of software quality assurance experience, Keith builds and leads a world-class team of QA consultants, manages software projects, and drives QA thought leadership. And I do want to give Keith a minute or two here so he can tell you a little bit more about Rivers Agile before we get started.
Sure. Thanks, Heather. So Rivers Agile is a full-service software development company that was formed in 2008 by Ben Wilson, who's the CEO and founder. We really offer the full complement of services, everything from data modernization, process improvement. We have strong roots in QA. Ben's craft is in QA. My craft is in QA. We've both done it for sort of a couple decades. And so certainly, QA health assessments in terms of maturity in your team, strategy, process improvement, but then also building custom web applications, mobile applications, and we even dabble in some embedded solutions as well. So we're happy to be here and happy to be on the webinar today. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have you and have you talk with Sergio a bit. And we'll start to actually jump into the meat of today's webinar a bit. So when it comes to unifying teams, tools, communication, all different aspects, we've found through a software testing and quality report that TestRail runs and publishes each year that teams are having constantly new technologies and ways of working, which have been game changers for testing efficiency, but this ever increasing number of tools and specializations expected from QA have somewhat fractured teams and processes. So one piece of data that we have on the screen here for you was we asked what test automation tools, suites, or frameworks do you use? And you can see the variety of tools that people are using within the industry. So we wanted to have a panel discussion today to talk through some reasons potentially why there's this fracture and how can teams actually unify all these technologies, the increasing number of tools, the multiple strategies for fostering cohesion, to try to get through and achieve some QA process maturity and figure out what your vision for your team, tech, and process should be. But then you also have to prioritize. So there's a lot to this, and we'll go ahead and get started with our first discussion. So one of the other questions that we asked for our survey was how often are various roles defining testing organization? And you can see here that there are many people involved. So Keith and Sergio, what strategies would you use to integrate testing processes with DevOps to ensure some sort of cohesion between QA and dev teams?
When we talk about teams, when you take a look at that slide there, we've got all these teams made up of a bunch of different people. So people has to be the first part of this, right? So you've got to start. Good cohesion has to start with the people. So what do we want to do? We want to foster collaboration. We want to facilitate communication. So how do we do that, right? So use your messaging apps, use your Slack, use your Teams, use your Discord. The actual tool doesn't matter. And a lot of this like, you know, tools are important and you need to have the right ones in place to ensure success, but process is important too there. And so you know, some people have too much focus, I think, on technology, on like, well, what stack are we going to use, or, you know, for testing, or what are we going to do there? And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but you've got to start with people, get them talking, get them communicating. So using your messaging apps is part of it. Also, you to use and take advantage of the agile ceremonies. So even if you're not an agile shop, or if you're a hybrid shop or a spiral shop, you can still take advantage of some things like daily stand-ups and retrospectives and reviews and demos and so forth. And the idea is to get everybody aligned, right? So a team that's aligned, that has good expectations set for both development in terms of telling them, hey, this is what we want to build, and QA understanding what's standard, keeping everybody aligned is key there, right? Because certainly what you don't want to happen is QA to file a bug that says like, hey, XYZ doesn't work. And then dev says, it's not supposed to work. No one ever told me that has to work. Nobody told me about that integration, right? So keeping everybody aligned is one way there. And by using those agile ceremonies can help you do that. Also, take advantage of your ticketing systems. So whether it's Jira, whether it's Azure DevOps, again, the system doesn't matter. But what you do want to do is make sure that decisions that are made in terms of the direction of the product are captured in context with the actual user story. So if you have a user story that is, I don't know, searching for items, you will, and there's some conversation. You know, one of the things is, you know, when you look at the 12 agile principles and you take a look, they talk a lot about like, well, let's have collaboration over documentation. Let's have a meeting, right? The problem is Joe's on PTO. Joe's been on PTO for a week. Guess what? He wasn't in that meeting. So how does Joe know? So the answer is you put all those decisions, you track those decisions within your ticketing system so that everybody's on the same page. And then lastly, in terms of sort of the people part of my answer, is involving QA early in the process, early in the product process and architecture review. It's a little bit cliche to say now, but we're definitely advocates of shifting left, right? No, shifting left, correct? And so it's very important, I think, to make sure the QA is there so that they can listen to the product manager, so they can listen to the stakeholders. Because what happens is developers often hear things through a lens, through a filter of what it is they're able to do, not necessarily what's being asked for. And so QA is there to like keep note of that and say that, wait a minute, that's not actually what they asked for. So so that's the people part, right? And so the other part is sort of you know, the more technical part. So how can those DevOps teams help this cohesion? So one thing you should do is try to make sure your test environment mimics production. We want to try to minimize false positives, false negatives, right? You want to prevent the problem of, well, it works fine in test, but it breaks in production. So what's different? So I can give you an example. We work with a local energy company here in Pittsburgh that serves more than 500,000 customers in our area. And anytime there's storms, anytime there's weather coming through, then of course there's power outages. And we certainly see that with the summer storms, with everybody turning on their air conditioners, right? So what ends up happening, right, is you get large swaths of people, say 40,000 people at a time that come and hit the website. And of course, what are they trying to do? Report an outage, and this is my address, and this is my phone number, and so forth, right? So in their particular instance, they were testing their code. Functionally, it works fine, right? But what happens whenever you have 40,000 people? Well, all of a sudden it breaks. Well, did they do any testing? Well, they did. The problem is that the hardware configurations they were using, so like the virtual machine types, whether it's a T2 medium or a T2 micro or a T2 extra large or whatever the case is, right? it wasn't the same. And so, especially when you're looking at performance testing, especially when you're looking at load testing, we want to make sure that we mimic what's in production so that our tests have validity. So that's important. And then finally, the last aspect is just giving QA control of that testing environment, right? So it's great that DevOps has enabled ideally like single button push to be able to promote a particular build to environment. Let's give that button to QA, right? There's been many tests that have been invalidated as a result of somebody switching the build in the middle. All of a sudden, I'm getting, 400 errors or something like this, right? I'm seeing like some server errors. Well, what happened? Oh yeah, we migrated the database. We did this. We needed to reboot the server. Now I got to go back as a QA engineer and look back and say, okay, what tests? When did they do this? Was it 10 minutes ago? Was it 15 minutes ago? How many of my tests are going to be valid? So
Right.
yeah. So that's
And
yeah, go ahead,
yeah,
Heather.
and Keith, I just want to give Sergio a chance to jump in because I know he had a number of
Sure.
thoughts, but Sergio, I can give you about a minute to talk before we need to move on to our next discussion point.
Hi, everyone. So going straight to the point, that I would try to pursue more collaboration, better communication, and more ways of enabling visibility about what's happening. And I think that it's really relevant that ops and QA, let's say, are part of the same team, and they are not really working as separate teams inside the overall product development team. And I think that testers really should work by side with other team members, including development. And for example, one way of involving them would be if the team is adopting, for example, pull requests, we can involve the testers while the developers are making the pull requests, so the testers can give feedback right away. That's like one strategy. I think it's also really important to kind of cross-pollinate knowledge. The more that we share across the team members, the better. Of course, we cannot know everything about everything, but we can have understanding about how things work. And by enabling better understanding, we avoid issues later on. So we can try to foster, for example, informal knowledge sharing sessions. I think that work quite well. And finally, just for the sake of managing time, I think it's also really important to go after stable test environments or test environments that we can easily spin up so people can be almost invited to test, right? Not and this way we can involve everyone in the team to test right away without being waiting for the QA team to test things later on.
Thank you. Yes, and those are some really great points, especially when you mentioned cross-pollinating with knowledge and taking advantage of things like agile ceremonies. So because from a QA process maturity perspective, there are various ways to go about this, right? A lot of people like to focus on automation, which is kind of why we throw this chart in here, but it's not just about that. So what does good, better, best actually look like, and realistically, what do you really want to try to shoot for?
I think before answering it, we think we really need to have like we should look for having a bird's eye perspective about where we stand in terms of quality, and how long do we actually get to integrate the feedback that comes from our end users or even from other stakeholders. If you are really taking a long time, then we have an issue for sure, right? We can say that we are mature in terms of process. If we can somehow remove this friction that inhibits us from delivering value quickly, right? So going back to the question, good, better, and best. So if I would fit this somehow, good for me would be, and this is hard fit, but good for me would be about having an exhaustive set of manual tests in place, together with some level of automated regression testing, right? So like the two sides of it could complement one another. Better than that, I would say one level on top of it would be to have unit tests in place, to have like a pull request kind of practice, or even pair programming if you want. Automated tests for the new features that the team is the team is aiming to deliver. Automated builds, automated deployments. That would be better. But we can always target for more, right? So what would be best? Best would be for everyone will be involved in testing, right? So if everyone feels like this appetite, sorry, but I really like to eat. So I have to connect the dots with having a good meal. And if everyone is having looks to taste the product, that person would be looking for improvement in quality, for making sure that we are going to deliver the best experience. So the sooner that we find issues, the better. So adding everyone inviting to testing would see or feeling invited would be great and would fit like in this best kind of level. But also, if we have like exploratory testing in place together with a really good set of test automation going on. So exploratory testing would help us uncover the unknowns that will always be there, and we cannot really target those with the test automation scripts. But we can adopt test automation to help us doing exploratory testing, by the way. We would also need to have full CI/CD working. Have testers working alongside developers right from the start, right? And also during development. I would say that thinking about the development, developers would make code together with unit tests, integration tests, but also other types of tests that sometimes we call non-functional tests, like security or performance tests. We have to think more on a more broad perspective, because there are here different angles that affect the quality perceived by other end users of that use our values, our product in so many different ways. And I have all of this fully integrated on the pipeline. And finally, it would be about also frequent releases. If we have a mature process in place, if people are really working together in the right way to pursue quality, we can for sure enable quality releases as soon as we can, or as soon as anyone demands. Keith, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think that there is so much in that answer that maybe I'll have to go back and review to be able to get all the different pieces and parts. Yeah, I mean, one of the parts that stuck out that really resonated with me is just talking about exploratory manual testing, really making sure you flesh that feature out, right? Because a lot of times what you don't capture with automation are some of the negative tests, some of the out of order tests, right? Because the developers and even the automation engineers that are writing your automated scripts are going to be going in an order, and generally speaking, they're following the proper order. They're following the end-to-end process, which is good for protection in terms of like good regression coverage, but not so good in fleshing out users and what they do, right? Because users aren't necessarily going to go in order. They're going to try to add something to the cart prior to them logging in, and is that supported or not? So yeah, so a lot to unpack there. I mean, when I think about good, better, best, one of the things that I come to often is parallels with the capability maturity model, right? CMMI or TMMI, the test maturity model with the organization out of England. And the CMMI was developed at CMU, which you know is a Pittsburgh-based university. So they're right up the road from me right now, maybe 15 minutes away. But it was developed at the Software Engineering Institute in about 1986 or 1987, somewhere in that time frame. And while I wouldn't get too wrapped up in the sort of textbook answers of the, oh, well, we consider ourselves in the initial stage or the managed stage or defined or whatever the different levels are, I think it is healthy and good to take a look at what the maturity is. So one of the services that Rivers Agile offers is a QA health maturity assessment. And I just wanted to run through briefly some of the different dimensions in which we analyze for good, better, and best. So we look at things like requirements health and test planning, test environment, bug reporting and resolution, test case automation, and then finally sort of organizational culture and management. And so those are the dimensions that we take a look at. And if we look at your list, Sergio, that you mentioned, you can break those down into most of those categories. Do you know what I mean? So the last thing I'll say about this, because I think we still have some time on this question, right?
We do.
Is that maturity assessment that we do, which is about, we try to answer like 60 foundational questions. And so we end up producing like a 60-page report. The interesting thing is that the questions vary based on the size of the organization, right? So if you have a small organization where you have like, for instance, you're a startup company with 5 or 10 people, or you're a really large company, good, better, best definition can change. And so the point is that the answer for good, better, best, it changes based on the type of organization and the size of the organization. And last thing I'll say is that a lot of people have a tendency to look to the big dogs. They look to Google, they look to Meta, they look to these things and they say, hey, I want to be like that. And what I always tell customers is that like, as soon as your, healthcare data analytics companies becomes a multinational search engine company, then maybe their solution is right for you. And that's not to say that the good and great technologies don't come out of these companies. So use Playwright from Microsoft, use some of these other solutions. But in terms of process, your process should be unique to your organization. And companies like Rivers Agile can help you do that. Thank you.
I love that.
May I have like 5 seconds?
Go ahead, Sergio.
One thing that I forgot to mention was observability tools. It's a topic that I really like, but I think for teams to have that, they need to have really a high level of maturity. But it's really, I think, can give great insights about what's happening in production and how people are actually using our features.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's interesting when you mentioned that there are a variety of different dimensions that come into play with this, and that's possibly one of them. And when you have all these different dimensions, you can get different outcomes. But I think everyone always wants to hear about a successful outcome, right? So when we're talking about that, what is really the desired outcome from putting forth all of this effort to unify your tools, your team, your processes, and what does success look like to you?
That's a really good question. And I think I can start probably framing it about, first of all, what I think could be failure instead. So things that I would try to avoid at all costs. And if we start having these discussions about who wants quality, who wants testing, I think that those discussions lead nowhere. And other type of discussion is that I see sometimes is, oh, I implemented this because that's what I understood and really nobody complained about it. Or sometimes when people kind of push the thing with a belly, it's a Portuguese expression, when they postpone like handling a certain issue or certain feature to the future, to the never-ending future. And basically you are just adding tech debt to the product. So that would be signs of failure. But for me, success would be something that would be mostly the opposite of it, about this. And for me, success would be about having a really good shared understanding about, first of all, what quality means, right? And taking that really serious. And in everything that we do within the team, no matter if you are talking about documentation, features themselves, artifacts that we make. Success would be about solving quality issues right from the start, even before we start implementing the code of the features. Whenever we start creating the features in our mind and sketching drafts about them, I think if we can solve quality issues there, we gain a lot, right? And we increase also the shared understanding. And success would be, amazing success would be if we could fix bugs right away, if we don't have to put them in a backlog and then they got like really holding the backlog. So I think we should think about how really efficient we are, right? And also about what inhibits us from delivering quality. What are the blockers there? Can we really work together as a team? So can we actually do that quickly? Can we deliver value with a high level of confidence? And also, what kind of confidence layers do we have in place, right? Because we can, with testing and also with process, we can have some sort of confidence levels that they are not foolproof. I mean, but they can help us, right? So another thing is that success in itself is not a goal that we achieve and that's it. It's more like an ongoing target that we are always looking for, because there are always ways of improving, right? So success is about overcoming the challenges as soon as we identify them and going for the next challenge, right? Also, one aspect is that sometimes you have this understanding that quality is static. Our users are static, right? Everything else static. The software is static, and infrastructure is static. But all these things change, right? So that means that what was successful years ago, what we would consider successful years ago, is not something that we would consider successful right now. We have to see, for example, looking from the, if we think about the end users, the end users, they value things differently with time. So they maybe long time ago, they are not concerned about security, but now they are concerned about security and privacy. So we have to have that in mind. So we cannot say that we are successful if we are not taking care of these, for example, security aspects. We can also have a set of practices in places that can help us become successful. But the fact that we implement those practices doesn't assure that we gain, that we will be successful by itself. But of course, we can do pair programming or ensemble programming if the team is open to it. We should be open. We should work towards the team be open. But I'm already talking too much, Keith. Passing the ball to you.
Well, it seems like it's contagious from me, so that's okay. No, I like your answer, Sergio. I like when you talk about continuous improvement. I like when you talk about heading towards a particular goal, right? So Rivers has worked with hundreds of clients over the years, and I've never met one that says, yay, we're here. We finally achieved it. We got our A, right? Okay, congratulations, you're finished. Everybody can go home, right? Like, thank goodness that's not the case, right? Because then companies like mine wouldn't have much to do, right? And so it really is a spectrum. Again, like I was talking about earlier, in terms of like type of company and size and all that should change. But in general, right, you should have like some type of North Star. You should have like, this is where we want to head. And so like, you know, we've talked a lot about improving collaboration and communication. Like that's a good outcome. That's a good goal to sort of improve that. How do we improve our efficiency? How do we automate repetitive tasks to allow QA to focus on sort of the critical thinking things, like the exploratory testing you were talking about in the manual testing phase, like let the humans do what we do best, let the machines do all the repetitive stuff, right? And so, so I think that's a good goal. Having a goal of traceability in terms of tracking tests back to requirements, bugs back to tests, and so forth. You know, having a requirements traceability matrix is important, right? Like, let's make sure that everything that is built has got some kind of associated tests with it. And, you know, I think there's a question coming up in the Q&A here in a little bit that we'll touch on that. And then finally, I think a good goal is just scalability, right? So as software grows, the number of manual regression tests that need to be executed grows with it, right? This is never going to end well until you introduce automation. We have a potential client that we've been talking with that has an application that has had 18 years of active software development on it. Well, how do you automate that? Not at the same time, not all within the first month. And so you have to be able to, so as your, as your application grows in size, as your application scales, you got to make sure that your QA process enables that scaling, and you do so with automation. So I think that I think that if we were to head towards those North Stars, if you will, I think that would be a desired outcome from my perspective. Thanks.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Sergio, I don't know if you have anything more you want to add.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we can go ahead.
I just picking that example because I think people love examples, and I think the point that sometimes, well, each team is like different, and the context what teams they where they are at, if they are working in a project from start, or if you are taking a legacy project, I think that is completely different. But we have like different ways, different tactics that we can apply. For example, I remember working in an old legacy project, and for that was lacking some level of test automation. And for that, a technique that worked really well was applying golden master testing, right? Because that way we could detect changes on the system and then make new features on top of it.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for presenting that example. I think that helps to provide some context. And Keith, you definitely alluded to our last discussion point here, and especially both of you really when we talk about continuous improvement, because everyone gets excited about the newest tools and technologies, whether it's shift left or now AI, and they're hoping that advances like these, like automation, CI/CD, test integration, would be the magic bullet for their QA program. But what is your experience with these tech forward approaches?
Sure. Yeah. I often liken this to someone who is, so I tried playing golf for like 2 years, 2 seasons. I was worse the second season than I was the first season, right? So of course, what do? You go to a golf pro, you take lessons, right? And I was sort of, maybe like a bogey golfer or something like this, right? Where I was okay. But the interesting thing is that I think in most professions, right, there's always like look at the basic foundational stuff first, right? And so is your swing, what's your swing looks like? What's your grip? Are your feet shoulder width apart or whatever? I certainly never figure it out on the golf front, but on the QA front, it's the same thing, right? So many customers come to us with a particular problem that they think is the issue, right? And your software testing report is great at sort of like identifying pain points that we're seeing out in the industry, right? So that one list, and I don't know, is that slide? No. But if you take a look at that report, you'll see that there's like 15 different common pain points. And the ones that we hear also in our business all the time is there's too many bugs leaking to the field. Your software releases are taking too long, right? And so what happens is some CTO, some CIO says, hey, we need a quick fix. We need to improve things. How can we do that? Can we introduce a new tool? Can we bring in more automation? Can we bring in the latest in AI, for instance, right? Can that help us, right? And see, I think that it's a mistake. Like there is no magic bullet. There is no silver bullet that's going to solve all your issues. And again, we wouldn't have a very profitable company if there was such an easy one. So the point is that you really, you can look at QA, and there's certainly improvements that you can make within QA and improve your STLC, your software testing lifecycle. But you should always be looking at your software development lifecycle, your SDLC, in a more holistic fashion, right? Because QA often finds themselves in the middle of the process, right? So they take inputs from the product teams, they take software from the development teams, and then they test, right? If you have garbage in, you're going to have garbage out. So in a lot of ways, QA is at the mercy of other phases working properly. And I'm sure we have a ton of QA professionals on the call today, and I'm sure that will resonate with them because, it's because QA sits right at the end of the process. Essentially, like they're on the critical path to delivering the software. And as a result of that, the pressure's on them, because all that has to happen is QA just has to say, okay, we ship this, we're good with it, go ahead and release it, right? And so the point, though, is that whenever you're trying to fix a software process problem, you have to make sure that you're identifying the root cause and not just the symptoms. You know, if you have a carpenter, for instance, that got a cut on his arm whenever he was doing something, well, you can treat the cut on the arm. You can apply a bandage, okay, and that's great. But what would be better is to understand, like, did he not have the proper PPE? Did he not have the right training, for instance? Did he not have the right process? And so how did we get there? Because otherwise it's just going to happen again, right? So the point is to get your whole house in order before you try to optimize, right? And so check how well your requirements are specified. Doesn't have to be a full-fledged PRD, but you're going to need more than user stories and acceptance criteria. Make sure you're doing both parts of verification and validation. Years ago, I was part of a V&V team. We weren't called QA, we were called V&V, right? And what are those two parts? Verification is building the product right. So that means that per the specs, per the user stories, that you're executing against those. But then there's also the validation part. Remember, we talked about bringing QA left into those product meetings? Well, paying attention to the stakeholders, paying attention to the product side of the house to make sure that we're building the right product, right? And there's some things we can do with like value stream mapping to be able to ensure that like what's actually delivered is useful and generates revenue for your company, right? And so I think having QA in those conversations is great. And then manual testing new features always, which we talked about with exploratory testing and Sergio's response. And then you bring in automation. And so like using these new technologies is great. You just have to do it at the right time, and you have to make sure your house is in order. What do you think, Sergio?
I think it's just a lot of points. So I think really innovating requires these different aspects that we already kind of touched. Continuous learning, continuous trying new tools, but also continuous try new ways of working. Whenever we have like CI/CD on that on the question there, I think that's just a bit of it, because as we mentioned earlier, there's no magic silver bullet, no magic solution, and tools won't solve like human related issues or social issues that sometimes we have within teams that can really block the delivery of value due to some misalignment or unclear expectations or unclear ownership. So I'm really I really like tools, I have to say, but we should assess them whenever we are thinking about bringing new tools to the team and see the fit with the team. So we have to do an overlap with the current skills within the team to see like the match. We cannot just be using tools just because usually that's not. If you are using tools without a purpose, then there's no. We won't get any benefits on it. And also the tools can augment, and I've been seeing that for quite a long time, the tools can augment our capabilities. They can also replace us in a bit in the things that are more repetitive. But instead of thinking maybe on a tech forward approach, we can try doing other things. We can try to address what I call, and some people call the testing depth quadrants. And I think that is a cool team exercise where the tool is a cardboard, and in that exercise you get the whole team together, and you put like the things that are inhibiting your team of making better testing. So you split the your testing related topics in things that are either impossible, slow, or untrustworthy, or that are complex. And you put there the cards, you discuss these issues that are inhibiting the team on making better testing. And sometimes we as a team, we figure out that maybe it's not a tool issue, sometimes it may be a tool issue, sometimes maybe a communication issue. So doing this kind of exercises, I think, can be great, can give better value, more value than actually bringing their tool just because, right? And that's a bit it from my side.
Beautiful. Now, this is the end of our discussion questions, but I know we do have a number of questions from everyone in the audience.
The
So
good part.
Yes, it is the good part. No offense to you both, but this is the good part.
Well,
so
we'll see about that, Heather.
Right, exactly. So we'll take we'll take close to 15 minutes to work through as many questions as we can, and then at the end, I'll just take 1 minute to wrap us up and share some resources with everyone here. All right, our first question though is we have an attendee that put, thinking about one of the earliest slides, is the increasing number of tools a real problem? Whilst it give organizations more choice, is the choice just all of them a common choice?
If I may answer on that, Heather. So I would say not to bring like dozens of tools inside, because that can be really messy. I know, and we know based on some research that some companies did, that teams use like roughly 7 tools, for example. So we need to, of course, try out tools, as I mentioned, because we need to learn and to improve what we are doing and not stick on the past, right? We need to evolve, but we cannot really be changing everything every minute, right? Because otherwise we won't be able to move at the pace that we need to. So it doesn't, and also if you want to have some sort of proficiency within the team, we don't tend to have like a project where we have like Python, JavaScript, TypeScript, Visual Basic, .NET, whatever, like a mix of everything, because then you don't have all those skills in everyone within the team. And in the end, we want to increase efficiency and shared understanding. So if we need to commute to kind of pass the ball to another team member, that person can jump in quite easily. And if you have all these tools, all these different languages, they, at a certain point, it will be a blocker, right? Because it doesn't allow us to, we cannot really go deep in everything, right? So that would be my advice. Keith.
And then, yeah, Keith, if you have any additional thoughts, otherwise we'll move on to.
No, let's move on. I think it's a great answer. Yeah.
So the next question we have is from Dan, and he was asking, in a highly regulated environment, how do you gather test evidence for unscripted exploratory testing, especially when you're trying to involve a cohort of stakeholder volunteers?
Sure. So, okay, so this is a good question, and we have worked with some in the FDA regulated environments, some like wearable devices, medical device industry, and so forth. So Rivers has some experience with this overall. What you do, right, is you make sure that you have happy path coverage in your organized tests that you can prove that this particular function works, right? And so exploratory testing still has value, and you can still capture those results. Now, you could capture those results in Word form, and have a particular like sort of results of the exploratory testing that can be typed up by the individual. However, it is much better, and I've found that those types of organizations like to have documentation. And so what you do is you make sure that you have organized testing coverage on every part, every feature. And remember, just like Sergio talked about a while back, not just on the functional portion of your application. So not just what your application does, but also how you want your application to be. So the non-functional side. So that means performance and load testing, if it applies in the right environment. So yeah, the answer is that exploratory testing is important to find the out of order and sort of unlikely edge cases. And that's good, and you should use those. But for your documentation, use your organized test cases for reporting during audits. Sergio, do you have anything to add there?
Nothing. I was here preparing answer for another question.
Well, Sergio, I know there were a couple that you marked in here to answer. Is there a specific one that you'd like to take?
Bring one to the table.
All right. All right. So this one is from Bobby. And he's asking, as an SDET at my company, I feel like I've observed a break in communication from not sharing a single source of truth. Product managers are using our ticketing system, Jira, for sprint and release management, whereas lead developers are using GitHub, and these two are only reporting the same thing if developers are titling/tagging PRs with their ticket numbers, which is begged for, though not programmatically enforced. Do you have any advice? I don't know yet why, in terms of tracking, all of it hasn't been automated.
So I think there the question summing a bit up, and from my understanding, is about when we start having like a bunch of overlapping kind of tools. We have issue trackers in one place, issue trackers in another place, and some people just use one or just use the other one. I think the team should kind of agree about what the tools and discuss that openly. It doesn't make sense for me to have, if you are putting creating issues in one side, creating issues in another side. I think you're just duplicating work, and sometimes even in another tool. So I think that teams should look after having these open discussions about their process. And sometimes someone dictates, oh, we need to use this, or we need to use that. And I really don't think that that's the best way to go. Sometimes we have to say, okay, team, I've tried this elsewhere. It works fine. If you don't have any other suggestions, we can start with this one. But if there's not really like the minimum kind of guidance on what to do, I think we can end up having duplication of effort, which we really try to avoid. And I think this somehow connects with another one there, which is about signs. We'll get into that.
So there was a question about, is there such a thing as too much unification and centralization? Is that and
Oh, yeah.
Is that the one you were referring to?
Yeah. So sometimes, yes, you can have that. Someone like over centralization, or someone like over defining process, and basically we are becoming just too bureaucratic. So once again, the team needs to discuss that, and that's not a discussion that we should do like once per year. We really should bring that to the table on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
If we are not being proficient, we should manage that as soon as possible. So if we start seeing like a ton of process, I would say that the clear sign that we can have in mind is if there's like a typo in the interface, a wrong color. If that single bug takes like 1 month, 2 months, 3 months for you to fix, then you have an issue. Yeah, but then your team says, oh, but we have to follow this, that, and that. I don't care. We have an issue. We are not working for the end user. If you have so many processes that are inhibiting us from the delivering value, as soon as that value makes sense, right?
True. And then I'm going to move on to our next question. And Keith, this one's going to be for you. But they're asking, one of the biggest challenges our organization struggles with is to measure quality broadly. So they've seen various approaches like number of outages, bugs, etc., to NPS or user satisfaction scores. But they would really love to hear what you all think about measuring quality broadly and the metrics you recommend. And there was another question, I believe that was similar to this, about asking about metrics across the team.
Sure. Okay. So here's the thing is that metrics and any type of KPIs can be problematic, and you should be careful about your focus. From what I see, you have sort of, your traditional sort of COOs or CEOs where they're like, well, give me some metrics. And, you know, just like CMMI and TMMI that we talked about, they talk about like, are you measuring? Are you recording these? I would be careful about trying to put a number score on it, right? And here's the thing is, part of continuous improvement should be evaluating where you are. I would just be careful about saying like, oh, we're a 42. And guess what? Next week, we're a 44. Yay, everybody, you know, let's have a cake for the 2 points we gained. I think it's a bad idea. However, here's a couple different things I would do. One, I would make sure, you know, if you ask, if you ask some C-level, like, how do you think QA is doing overall? They're going to know, at least from what the output of the process was. Like, they're going to know whether the users are happy or not, because guess what? The complaints are always heard loudly, right? So the key thing is to make sure that you have somebody who's reviewing your test plans, reviewing your test cases, that you review your test cases as a team. The only KPI I will allow you to have is a defect escape rate. And this is one I do like a lot. What you do is for all the bugs that you find before the release, you track those, and you track both the number of them, but also the severity. So what the impact is to the business, you multiply those together and you come up with defect escape rate points. And you take your points that are found before you release, and you take your points that you find after release, and you divide those two numbers, and that gives you your QA effectiveness score. And that will tell you, like, are you finding most of the stuff before the stuff is released, before the software is released, or after it makes it to production? And that will give you how well QA is doing. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks. The next one then I think is going to be for Sergio here. And we have Britt who was asking, is a major goal of automation to free up QA to have the time and focus needed to do exploratory testing?
That's curious, because I've said that a few times, but it's that, but it's also more. So it's about, we need automation to have, first of all, confidence levels, like to make sure that we get fast feedback whenever the developer is making some changes in the product, that the developer gets that information about whether he or she is breaking anything on the current implementation. So it's about having fast feedback, right? Of course, with that, we gain time for development, for proper development, and also for testing, for doing a more exploratory testing. So I think in the end, we gain time for the whole team, right? So we automate things that are worth to automate, so we can focus our attention elsewhere. And so we can make testing, make changes also with more confidence.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I think that is the last question that we're going to get to. And that being said, I do want to thank everyone so much for joining us today. Sergio, Keith, this huge thanks to you for participating in this discussion and sharing your knowledge and insights.
Sure, the pleasure was all mine, Heather. Thanks so much for including us.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, team.